either means you are very, very bored and have nothing else to do, or more likely you really care about getting a good score in Ielts. So thanks very much for coming. Thank you very much. Big welcome to all of our friends on Facebook. Hope you can see me. Wherever you are in the world, if you're on the beach or if you're here in Hanoi or somewhere in Vietnam, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to have a little bit of fun. I won't make it too boring, I promise. I'll try and make it as fun as I can. And today I'm going to give you some tips about writing. But I'm not going to give you the normal boring tips about plan before you write and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to try and give you some practical tips to get a 7. So that's my goal for you, is a 7. And I hope you'll get at least that or more. So today I'll talk about 5 secrets, 5 specific secrets about getting a 7 in both Task 1 and in Task 2. Towards the end, I'll give you some recommended books and websites, which I find quite helpful. And I'm sure they'll be helpful for you too. And most of all, we'll have lots of time at the end. We'll have about half an hour for any questions at all about writing, whether they're little tiny questions or huge life-changing questions. I'll try my best to answer any questions at all. And the good news is, if you ask a question, you can win a lovely prize from the British Council. It's that easy. All you need to do is ask a question, and you can get one of these 10 amazing prizes. We have books from the British Council about Ielts. We have some USBs. We have some movie tickets. Really easy to win a prize. Just ask any question. OK, so to start with, just a little bit of get to know you. Maybe with the person beside you or a few people beside you. What's your target score for Ielts writing? Yeah? If it's 6, 6.5, 7, 9, 9.5, why not? What scares you? This is a deep personal question. Yeah? What scares you about Ielts writing? What's your biggest fear about writing? And the third, the most important question, I find this one divides Vietnam. Everybody has a preference. Are you a pho ba kind of person, or are you a pho ga person? Yeah? So with the person beside you, if you're watching on Facebook, maybe a comment in the live stream. Let's spend about 2 minutes. Yeah? If there's any interesting comments, can you somehow let me know? Okay. Sure, yeah.
Can you explain more about the third fraction?
It's what's, you can only choose one, yeah? For the rest of your life, if you could only eat pho ba, or if you could only eat pho ga, you can only choose one, yeah? Okay, I'll share mine, yes, I'll go first. My target writing score, I'd be happy with an 8. I'd be happy with an 8. It's pretty hard, yeah? I'd be very nervous about running out of time. Yeah, I'm a very slow hand writer, so I'd be very happy with an 8, personally. What scares me about writing? Time. It's really hard to do everything in 1 hour. I'm the kind of person who likes to overthink, so I worry I just spend half of my time thinking. So that's what scares me. I'm probably not the only one. Yeah. And for me, I'm a classic, I'm a traditionalist. Pho ba that's my dream. Yeah, I could eat it every day for the rest of my life, and I'd be very happy. Okay, so let's start with the basic information about how it's marked. Task 1, it's marked in only 4 categories, and each of these categories is worth the same. Yeah. So the first one's called task achievement, which basically means have you followed the instructions? Have you done what the task is asking you to do? So for example, have you written at least 150 words? Have you summarized the main features of the graph or the diagram or the process? Have you included some data or some numbers to support your explanation? Things like that. The second one's called coherence and cohesion, which basically means organization. So is it easy for the reader to follow your essay from the beginning to the end? And normally the way you do that is using paragraphs, using discourse markers or kind of connecting words to connect your sentences so that the reader can just easily follow from the beginning to the end. The third one, it's kind of a confusing word. They say lexical resource. So a lot of people say, what does that mean? Basically, it just means vocabulary. So are you able to use a wide enough range of vocabulary to summarize this graph? And the fourth one is called grammatical range and accuracy, which means can you use a range of different types of sentence structures? Can you make not too many mistakes? It doesn't have to be perfect even for a 9. You're allowed to make a few mistakes in a 9, but not too often for those mistakes. Task 2, it's quite similar. These two are actually exactly the same between task 1 and task 2. Organization, there's only one slight difference which relates to paragraphs. So paragraphs in task 2, are a little bit more important than task 1 because task 2 is a longer essay. Task 1 is only 150 words, so paragraphing is not as important, but task 2, it's a little bit more important. Otherwise, everything else is exactly the same. And the big difference for task 2 is the first category is called task response, which means how well have you responded to the question. So how clear are your ideas, how well do you explain your ideas, etc. But really the big difference between task 1 and task 2 is the first category. Ielts is very transparent, yeah? There aren't any big secrets. A lot of people ask me, so what are the secrets to getting a 7? I say, there are none. It's all right here. And they say, I know, but what are the real secrets? I say, there are none, trust me. But Ielts does have copies that you can download for free. So if you go to these 2 websites, it should take you directly to the PDF. And it's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit boring, I'm not going to lie. If you're having difficulty falling asleep, about 10 minutes reading this, you'll be fast asleep. Dreaming of Ielts, maybe. So my advice is don't try and read everything. If you try and read from 1 to 9, it's just too much information. So maybe think about your goal. If your goal is, say, a 7, maybe read 6, 7, and 8. Yeah, but if your goal is a 7, why would you read 2? Right? It's obviously much below your goal. And if your goal is a 5, why would you read 9? So think about your goal, maybe 1 above and 1 below. That's enough. So the first secret, this one relates to task 1. And Ielts calls it a clear overview. And if you look at a 7 from task achievement, this is one of the bullet points. They say, presents a clear overview of the main features, main trends, differences, or stages. And if you look at a 6 and a 5, they also mention overview. So what is an overview? It's basically a very short summary of the most important thing. So imagine if your friend asked you, what's this about? And you only have 10 seconds to tell them. That's kind of like what an overview is. So for example, after today, if your friend asks you, what did you learn about at this workshop? And you say, Ielts. It's not very clear, yeah? But if you say, well, the first slide was about football and foga, and the second slide was about marking criteria, and the third slide, too much information, yeah? So what Ielts is looking for is a very brief summary of just the most important things that happened, yeah? And I'll show you some examples in the next part. It's usually one sentence, but it can be two, particularly if there are multiple graphs. So for example, if you have a pie chart and a table, you might want to have one sentence for each of those. Or if it's a really complicated diagram, you might want to have more than one sentence. But for most of the graphs, you should be able to write an overview in about one sentence. If you're writing more than that, you may be including too much detail. Normally, it's in the introduction paragraph. So normally what I would do is my first sentence would kind of summarize what's the graph about. Yeah? So if you look in the box at the top, it usually says, the graph shows information about blah, blah, blah. I'd change the words a little bit so I'm not copying. So I might use some synonyms. I might change the order a little bit. That would be my first sentence. And then my second sentence would be the overview. So I'd say, overall, more and more people are going to the cinema, for example. So normally I put those two sentences together in the introduction paragraph. And here's the most important thing of the day, yeah? If you only listen to one thing, this should be it. If you don't have a clear overview, it's a maximum 5 for task achievement. So even if you have a brilliant, beautiful essay, but you're missing that overview, you're stuck in the 5 for task achievement, which means you need to get higher scores in the other 3 categories, which is hard, yeah? So it's a really important sentence. It's not easy to write because you need to understand the graph first. So it will probably take you a few minutes to understand what's happening and then write the overview sentence. I'll show you an example, yeah? And I'll show you a bad example, a good example, and a great example. So this is the graph. I hope you can see it okay. It's basically about telephone calls in the UK. Very exciting topic. From 1995 to 2002. And we have 3 different categories, 3 different types of phone calls. Yeah. So before I show you the examples, maybe just have a think. Yeah, you don't need to share with your partner. Just have a think about what's the most important thing that you see. Yeah? Just spend about 30 seconds thinking. Okay, so now I'll show you a few examples. This is a bad example. This one's kind of the lazy example. This one says, overall, there were many significant changes in the figures. Well, it doesn't really say what changed, yeah? And it's kind of like if you asked me, oh, Dan, tell me about your wife. What does she look like? What's she like? I say, oh, my wife, she's human. Doesn't really help much, yeah? So this is kind of a very lazy way of writing an overview. Overall, there were many changes. Overall, the graphs are very interesting. That doesn't really say anything. So this is a very lazy way of writing it. This one's a much better example. I'll give you a chance to read it. So this one's much better, and I'll explain some good features. So here they say the duration of national and international calls, so that's this one here, increased. And mobiles, so these two increased. And I know they did increase differently. So mobiles increase kind of exponentially, yeah, whereas national and international increase gradually. But for the overview, you don't need to be that exact. It's okay just to be general and say they increased. Yeah, we can talk about the differences later in the body paragraph, but for now, it's okay if we just say increased. Whereas, so that's a nice connecting word to make it one sentence. Instead of having two short sentences, that word kind of connects it. Whereas local fixed line calls rose, then fell. So it's kind of summarizing the graph, what happened in the graph. It's not too long. It's probably about 25, 30 words maybe. So it's not too long. It does cover all of the important trends. And it's a nice complex sentence. So this would be a really good example. Yeah? And I'll show you a great example. So this one's probably even better than the last one. Any ideas why? What makes this one better than the last one? Any guesses? Specific time? Yeah, it does include that. Yeah. Anything else? Comparison, good. So if you look at this first part here, it says, local fixed line calls were still the most popular in 2002. So this is quite interesting because it tells us what was the highest. Instead of just talking about the trends, like it increased, it decreased, it actually tells us the ranking, which one was the highest. Sometimes you might say which one was the lowest. You might say higher than, lower than. But this is a really good way of looking at not just what happened, but also what's important. So when they say still the most popular, it tells me that it was always number one. It was always the highest right from the beginning to the end. Yeah, so that's a really effective way to show not just what happened, but what's important. It depends on the graph, of course, but for this graph, it's very obvious that I think that's a very important feature, is what was the highest one. And then the second part, they kind of summarize the trend in a really efficient way. They say the gap between them, so the difference between these ones, the gap between them had narrowed, so they became much more similar towards the end. So it's a really nice, efficient way of summarizing. But the thing that makes this one great is it's not just the trend, but it's also the ranking. So when you're planning your overview, maybe think about, is it possible to include both in the overview? However, if it takes you 15 minutes to write one sentence, it's not worth it. It shouldn't take you more than about 4 or 5 minutes. If it is taking you more than that, maybe you're overthinking. I know this is beautiful and amazing, but it doesn't have to be perfect in Ielts. It just has to be good enough. Yeah. So don't spend too much time on the overview, but maybe have a think about what's the highest, what's the lowest, higher than, lower than, etc. Okay, your turn. A little bit of practice. Yeah. This is a chart about radio and television audiences in the UK. Another fascinating topic. Way back in December 1992, when people still listened to the radio. And this chart is interesting because it's hours in the day. Yeah. So it's from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock the next morning. And we have two lines. This little dashed line is for radio, and this big dashed line is for television. Yeah. So with a partner, you don't need to write anything, just talk together. For our friends on Facebook, maybe just write a little comment if you have some time. What do you see as the most important thing that happened here? Okay, let's say about 2 minutes with a partner, please. That's the hard part, yeah. Okay, if you are brave and you'd like to volunteer, I do have 2 prizes. Yeah, I have a Collins Keywords for Ielts Advanced, an amazing read. It's a very interesting story. No, it's kind of like a dictionary of useful words for Ielts. And this one is the Ielts Essential Guide from the British Council. A very long read. It's about 500 pages of goodness. Yeah. So if you're feeling brave, just tell me your overview, and if it's not horrible, you can win a prize. Yeah. It's pretty easy. Yeah. Any volunteers? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, overview. Overall, the people who watch, who listen to radio focus on the morning, while the people who watch the television focus on the evenings.
Okay, so people who listen to the radio focus on the morning, that's here, and people who watch television focus on the evening, which is about here. Yeah, good. So obviously this one's pretty obvious that there's a big difference between the morning and the evening. So you could probably draw a line here and see that, yeah, it's quite different for the morning and the evening. I think that's pretty good. You can have keywords for IELTS. No worries, it's that easy. Any other volunteers? This is for the big book. Go ahead.
The most highest percentage of audience for TV and radio depends on the time of the day, night and morning.
Okay, for radio from,
Night,
okay,
morning,
okay. And how about for television in the evening? So you might say, what's the highest point in the evening?
highest percentage of audience for TV and radio depends on the time of the day.
Okay.
Between 9 and morning.
Okay, 9 in the morning. And in the evening?
Evening.
Yeah. So yeah, for that one, you'd probably want to say, if you mention this one in the morning, you'd probably want to say, and vice versa, or on the other hand, television is most popular at about 8 in the evening. Yeah. So it's good. You've caught basically the peaks of each of them. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a really good overview. So congratulations. Happy reading. So the interesting thing is, for an overview, you can have 100 different overviews. There's no one correct answer. So don't worry if you're practicing and yours is different from your friends. It's okay, because everybody sees something different, and there's no one correct way to write an overview. So as long as it's significant, as long as it's true, you're not making up data, then it's fine. Yeah. So don't overthink. It should take you maybe 4 or 5 minutes in total. If it's taking you longer than that, maybe you're overthinking. Okay, the next secret. IELTS uses this word quite a lot in coherence and cohesion. Remember, coherence and cohesion refers to organization. Yeah. And this secret applies to both task 1 and task 2. Because remember, organization in both of the tasks is quite similar, except for paragraphing. And IELTS uses this in 7 for a bullet point. They say uses a range of cohesive devices appropriately. A range of cohesive devices appropriately. So the first thing we need to understand is, what do they mean by cohesive device? Cohesive device is basically literally cohesive, or cohesion means sticks together. Cohesion means to stick together, excuse me. So what they mean in organization are words or phrases that connect your ideas or connect your sentences together. And there's many different words. Some people call them connectives. Some people call them connecting words. Some people call them linking words. Some people call them discourse markers. Ielts calls them cohesive devices. They all kind of mean the same thing, which are words or phrases to connect ideas or to connect sentences together. And I chose this picture because that's kind of how I see it. I see it as a link, a chain that links your ideas or sentences together. So here's what Ielts cares about. Number one, they care about a range of cohesive. So they don't want just simple ones. They don't want things like firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly. They don't want boring ones like moreover. Everybody uses moreover. They don't want boring ones like in conclusion. Ugh. Imagine the poor examiners, if every essay they read, it's always firstly, secondly, thirdly, in conclusion. Next, firstly, secondly, thirdly, in conclusion. It's very boring, yeah? So they want to see some less common ones, some more interesting, not ones that everybody else uses. And I'll show you some examples a bit later of those less common ones. The second thing they want, which not many people know about, is most people use these between sentences. So it's like the first word in your sentence. Yeah? But Ielts is looking for also within your sentence. And that's a little bit more advanced. Yeah? It's not many people use them within the sentence. So if you're able to use some of them within your sentence instead of always at the beginning, you're kind of different from the norm, different from the pack. So I'll show you how you can do that in a couple of slides. But I'd say about 90% of people only use them at the beginning of the sentence. So if you're able to use some of them within, you're different from most candidates. And like I said earlier, they want more than just listing. So if you say firstly, secondly, thirdly, it's not showing the relationship. It's just showing the order. It's like saying 1, 2, 3. But Ielts expects a little bit more advanced connecting words than that. So here's an example of what I mean by less common. So on the left-hand side, these are some simple ones that almost everybody can use easily. But on the right side, these are some less common ways to say the same thing. Feel free to take a picture if you'd like, a souvenir of the day. Yeah. I hope I'm not in the picture. Now, you don't have to use all of these, yeah? In fact, if you used all of these, that would be a little bit too many. You'd be overusing them. So maybe use a couple from each of these categories, yeah? But you don't need to use all of these. But for example, instead of firstly or first of all, you might say to begin with. You might say first and foremost. It's something a little bit different than what most people would use. Instead of saying however, you might say conversely. You might say in spite of this or despite this, et cetera, et cetera. So these are some nice ways to make your connecting words different from most people. Yeah. I hope after today, not everybody is using the same ones from today. Just to start. There are many, many more out there. The other good thing is some of these are quite long. So this one, by the same token, it's 4 words instead of 1 word. So it could actually help you make your word count go up a little bit. A nice bonus. The other thing, like I mentioned, is not always at the beginning of the sentence. Yeah. So not always, and there aren't any rules that I can give you. English is kind of like that. But they can often be used within the sentence. So I'll show you a few examples. Here they say strict punishments, comma, on the other hand, comma. So instead of saying on the other hand, strict punishments, which most people would probably write like that. This one, they're moving it within the sentence, so it's a little bit more advanced, which is what Ielts is looking for in the 7. Another example, this solution, in addition, instead of saying in addition, this solution. So it's just moving it within the sentence. And you'll notice that it's surrounded by commas, so comma, comma. And it's between the subject and the verb. Yeah. So like I said, you can't use it for every single connecting word. There are some exceptions. But if you don't know, just try it. And if you're wrong, at least you're showing your range. At least you're showing your range. Even if there are some mistakes, it's not that important. Another example, that, however, is not an effective solution to the problem. So you don't need to use these within the sentence for every single one, but if you can use a few of them within your sentences, you're really showing off to the examiner your flexibility. And to get a 7, that's what the examiner's looking for, is can you be flexible? Yeah. If you remember the previous slide, I showed you the picture of this guy doing yoga. Yeah. And that's flexible, yeah? That's what they're looking for, is can you be a little bit different? Can you be a little bit flexible instead of very rigid? Basically, you want to be a little bit different. Imagine the poor examiners, they have a pile of essays to mark, and you're at the bottom of the pile, and the first 20 essays are first of all, secondly, thirdly. First of all, secondly, thirdly. And you're the very last one, and the examiner just wants to go home and relax. It's been a boring day, and the last one is first and foremost. Whoa. In spite of this. Whoa, nice. So that's you. You've turned into a cat. Those are your connecting words or linking words, and that's the tired examiner. So your job is to wake them up. Be interesting. The third secret is in the same category, coherence and cohesion. Again, it relates to both task 1 and task 2. And Ielts calls this referencing and substitution. And this is something that not many people notice in the marking criteria. So in a 5, they say maybe repetitive. So repetitive means you repeat the same words, repeat the same ideas again and again. Maybe repetitive because of a lack of referencing and substitution. So keyword, a lack of. So if you tend to repeat the same words again and again, that would be a lack of referencing. And I'll explain what exactly does this mean in the next part. But basically, if you repeat the same words again and again, it's probably in the 5 category. In a 6 that says may not always use referencing clearly or appropriately. So that means sometimes you're using it, but maybe it's a little bit unclear at times. But you're trying to. You're trying to use it. And that would be within a 6. In a 7, they don't mention it specifically, but we can assume that if a 6 says may not always use it appropriately, a 7 means you're using it clearly and appropriately. Yeah. So let's look in more detail. What does it mean? What do they mean by substitution, referencing and substitution? The easier one is substitution. So it's kind of like a football match. Yeah? So number 9 comes off, number 7 comes on. So they change the players. And in Ielts, substitution just means you change the words. So you use synonyms, maybe you use pronouns instead of repeating the same word again. So instead of saying the number, the number, the number, the number, the number, the number, you might use a different word. You might say the number or the figure. Yeah, exactly. So that's basically you're changing the word number for figure, and you're substituting, just like on a football match. You're substituting this player for that player. So this is pretty basic. It's pretty easy. You just need to use a few synonyms. I'm sure all of you are already doing that. That's pretty simple. The more complicated one is referencing. And what referencing means is when we refer back. That's why they use the word reference. It refers back. And I like to use this picture where you're looking back in the mirror. You're looking back. And this is a little bit more advanced because it's not just using synonyms. It's using words that refer back to what you said earlier. So this is much more advanced. And therefore, it's much more difficult. So I'll show you an example. This is a really repetitive paragraph. It says, my cat is named Mitz, and my cat is white. I really like my cat because my cat is friendly, and I hope my cat, again, will stay friendly in the future. So obviously, they're overusing the word my cat. Sorry, the phrase my cat. So before I show you some examples, with a partner, maybe think of some other words, some other synonyms instead of my cat. Yeah? So let's try and substitute some other ways to say my cat. I know this might be difficult. You probably don't think about cat vocabulary too often. Yeah, try your best. So with your partner, Facebook, maybe just leave a quick comment. What are some other ways instead of saying my cat again and again? Yeah. Pet mentions name. Shala. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so now you have lots of cat vocabulary. Very useful in their Ielts. I don't think I've ever seen a topic about cats in Ielts, but maybe one day. Before I get some examples, I looked at the comments on the Facebook page. There was a really good one from Shala Abdullah. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. So using she or it. And that one's interesting because a pet, should you use it like a thing, or should you use he or she like a person? It depends. Normally, I guess in Western culture, people are very close to their pets. Most people would say he or she. It just depends how close you are to your pet, I guess. But yeah, you could use a pronoun like she or it. You could use the cat's name. You could use Mitts maybe again. Okay, any ideas from the audience? What else could I use instead of my cat? Yeah.
My cat's name is Mitts and it's white.
It's white.
I really like my pet.
My pet, good.
Because he or she is friendly, and I hope my dear friend or my dear buddy will stay friendly in the future.
Good. My dear buddy. Oh, that sounds very nice. Yeah, good. Yeah, excellent. Any other ideas for my cat? Yeah.
Yes, my cat's name is Mitts and she is white. I really like her because Mitts is friendly, and I hope my kitten will stay friendly in the future.
There you go. Good. So she, Mitt, my kitten instead of my cat. Good. Excellent. Here's a test. What's the adjective of cat? Wow, amazing. Who said feline? Was that you? Amazing. You have really good cat vocabulary. I'm impressed. So I'll show you in my example. This is my example. My cat is named Mitts and she is white. Yeah. So like a few people have said, I really like my pet. I think that was the same. Because my kitty, I'm a very emotional pet owner. My kitty, like a kitten. Yeah. And I hope my feline friend, so there was a test of your vocabulary. Feline is the adjective of cat. Don't write it down. You'll never need to use it again in your life, I'm sure. But in case you're curious, what is the adjective of cat? So this is an example where I'm just substituting these different words instead of repeating my cat again and again. So that would be the basic way. Now, to be a little bit more advanced, you'd probably want to use some referencing. And some examples of that are pronouns like we used it, she, they, etc. This is actually a very powerful word, this. You can also use this and a noun. So you might say this or this cat, this person, this or this idea, etc. I'll show you an example. Some people think that the government should pay for education, and I agree with this, or I agree with this view. So instead of repeating, the government should pay for education. It's referring back to that idea, yeah. But in a much more efficient way. It's only one word, or here it's 2 words. Some other things you can do, you could say the former. So if you talk about 2 things, the former is the first one, and the latter is the second one. You can only use it for 2 things. So if you have 3, it doesn't work. Yeah, you'd have to say the former or the latter only for 2 things. That one's very useful in task 1. So if you talk about, say, the price of gold and the price of silver, you could say the former was $10, the latter was 20, instead of saying silver and gold again. Another one is respectively. So respectively you could use for 2 things, or you could use for 3 things. I wouldn't use it for more than 3, because then it's a little bit complicated for the reader. So if you say the price of gold, silver, diamonds, and platinum were $10, $50, $100, $200. Whoa, 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 whoa. Which one's which? So I wouldn't use it for more than 3 things. Here are some other useful phrases. That of. Yeah. The price of gold was $100, while that of, instead of saying the price of again, that of silver stood at $50. So instead of repeating silver again, instead of repeating the price again. Here's an example of respectively. The price of gold and silver rose to $100 and $200 respectively. If you're referring to a point in time, you might say from this year onwards, or from this point onwards, or from this period onwards, instead of saying the year again. Another one you might say is the reverse, if something is opposite. So if you remember the example about radio and television, you might say radio is most popular in the morning, while the reverse is true for the afternoon. Yeah, or while the opposite was true for the afternoon. So instead of referring to the word, you're referring to the idea. Some other useful phrases for task 2. This is like a nice thesis statement here. This essay will discuss 2 reasons why I agree with this view or this viewpoint. In your body paragraphs, when you're explaining, you might say one reason for this is, one such example of this. This one actually has 2. It's a double reference. One such example of this is. One way of explaining this is, an interesting example of this is, this may be true to some extent, but, etc., etc. So you can see it's a little bit more advanced than just changing the words, substituting the words. So if you're able to use some of these referencing words or phrases, you're really showing off your advanced organization. Yeah. And like I said, not many people know about this in Ielts, and not many people use them in my experience. So you'll be different from the norm. So it's a good idea you came here tonight. Yeah. Okay, the next secret relates to task 2 specifically. And Ielts uses the word position. To get a 7 in task response, one of the bullet points is presents a clear position throughout the response. And a position, what's another way to say position? Any ideas? Stance, I heard, yeah. Opinion, yeah. Outlook, yeah. Point of view, perspective, etc., yeah. So Ielts is, for task 2, if the question is asking for your opinion, Ielts wants it to be clear, and they want it to be clear throughout the response. So it shouldn't change. Sometimes you see really strange essays where at the beginning it says, I strongly agree, and then at the end it says, I strongly disagree. Like, what happened? So it should be clear throughout the response. I chose this picture. I'm not sure if you can see it clearly, but for this picture, this person says it's a 6, and this person says it's a 9. So obviously, 2 different viewpoints. And if that's you, if that's the writer, and you say, I strongly agree, but the reader doesn't see that, they see I strongly disagree, it means that your perspective is not clearly being communicated. So before we talk about position, let's think about what tasks are asking for your position in Ielts. So I've chosen 5 of probably the most common question types in task 2. And for each of these, I'd like you just to talk with your partner or comment on the Facebook page. Which of these is asking for your position or your opinion or point of view? Which of these is asking for an analysis but no opinion? And which of these is asking for both position and analysis? Yeah? So for each of these 5 prompts, is it 1, 2, or 1 and 2? Okay? Let's say 2 minutes with each other, please. One and 3. Try and answer that one. Okay. Chang. Okay, thanks. It's a little bit tricky. Yeah, some of them it kind of depends. Some of them it depends. So I just looked at the Facebook comments. Thanks to Mr. Chang. Thanks for your comments. I think you got most of them right. Let's go through them one at a time and see what I think. The first one, to what extent do you agree or disagree? Is that 1, 2, or 1 and 2? It's just 1. Yeah, they're asking for your opinion. And your opinion is how much do you agree or how much do you disagree? Yeah. Pretty simple. The second one, not so simple. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? 1 and 2. Okay. It depends. It depends how you write it. So the way I would write it, which I think many people would probably do the same thing, is my first paragraph I'd talk about the advantages. So I'd analyze what are the advantages. And then my second paragraph I'd analyze what are the disadvantages. But I do need to answer the question overall. Right? It is a yes-no question. It's do. Do the advantages. So I need to have an answer, yes they do or no they don't. So overall, I would give my position. So probably in the conclusion, I'd say, overall, after considering both, I argue that the advantages are stronger than the disadvantages. So it's 2 with a little bit of 1. Mostly analyze, but maybe your opinion at the end. However, you could, if you wanted to, you could just argue for one side. So you might just say, from the beginning, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. And here are some reasons why. So you could make it mostly position with a bit of analysis. It just depends on your style. Yeah? I think the easiest way is analyze, overall, answer the question. That's the way I would write it. But you could kind of argue one side, I guess. The third one, discuss both views and give your own opinion. 1, 2, or both. It's kind of the same thing. It's really the same essay. So discuss both views, that would be analysis. And then at the end, give your own opinion, that would be position. Okay. So it's kind of the same structure, really. Number 4, what are the causes of this and what measures could be taken to solve this problem? Analysis. Good. They're not asking for your opinion. They're not asking, is it good? Is it bad? It's just analyzing. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Just number 2. Just analysis. Yeah. So they're not asking for any position at all. And the last one, is this a positive or a negative development? 1 and 2? Yeah. Just one? It depends. Again, it's quite similar to this one where I could analyze what are the positive features, what are the negative features. Overall, negative. Or I could just choose one and I'd say, here are 2 reasons why it's positive. Again, if it were me, I'd probably be more balanced. I'd look at positive and negative, kind of like this one. But it is possible just to choose one side. But I would recommend maybe being more balanced. So it's important when you get your question is to think about, are they asking for my opinion? Or are they just asking me to analyze? Or are they asking me to do both? And if they are asking for your opinion, it's important that it's clear and consistent. So for example, if it's agree or disagree, it should be very clear to the reader which one is it. Is it agree? Is it strongly agree? Is it slightly agree? Is it strongly disagree? It should be clear. The reader shouldn't have to think about it. It should be really obvious to them what's your opinion. And it should be consistent, so you don't want to change halfway through. Yeah. So that's why planning is very important, because if you think about your ideas before you write, you won't have that problem. It's the people who start writing and then they change their mind. Those are the people who usually their opinion's not very clear. And the other thing is, Ielts doesn't want you to be ambiguous. Ambiguous means unclear. Yeah? And a lot of people have these kind of phrases which don't say anything. So for example, every coin has 2 sides, and this issue is no exception. It's overused, it's a cliche in Ielts. And really, if you think about it, that doesn't say anything. It doesn't actually say what is your opinion. And some people change it. So some people change the word coin to knife, and they say every knife has 2 edges. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. But really, that's not drawing any conclusions. It's not saying anything. So try and avoid phrases like that. Overall, I both agree and disagree with this issue. I'm exactly in the middle. Ielts doesn't want you to be in the middle. They want you to have some opinion. It doesn't matter how strong your opinion is. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree, as long as it's clear. But Ielts hates it when people say, overall, I don't know. Or overall, it depends. Or overall, I both agree and disagree. That's kind of lazy, I think. The next one, this is a serious issue in modern society which needs to be addressed. If it's so serious, why are you wasting your time doing an English exam? Go out and solve the world's problems. Don't spend 3 or 4 hours doing your Ielts exam. Go out there and solve the world's problems. The government needs to take action. Call the Prime Minister. Oh, no phones allowed in Ielts, I'm sorry. But basically, overall, be careful with these phrases because they don't actually give your opinion. And Ielts wants you to have a very clear opinion. So try not to sit on the fence. Sit on the fence means you're exactly in the middle. You're very neutral. If it's asking for your opinion, make sure it's clear. Examiners don't care what your opinion is as long as you have an opinion. The last secret is a tricky one. It's hard to improve, yeah? This one just takes a lot of time and effort. It relates to less common vocabulary. So this is the same in both task 1 and task 2. Yeah, it's exactly the same. And one of the bullet points in 7 is uses less common lexical items. Lexical items, words or phrases. That just means words or phrases. Less common lexical items with some awareness of style and collocation. So this is a really complicated sentence. Yeah, let's break it down a bit. So the first thing is less common. So the examiner wants to see some vocabulary that not everybody else uses. Yeah, and there's no list that the examiners have. There's no instruction. This is less common. This is common. It depends on a lot of things, but it's kind of relative to other people. So for example, in Vietnam, a lot of people will use vocabulary like interesting, comfortable, useful. A lot of people say, thanks to the development of modern technology, plays an important role in something. These are kind of words or phrases that are overused a bit in Vietnam. Yeah? So the examiners are looking for, can you use some more impressive vocabulary? Yeah? So for example, instead of interesting, what are some other less common words or phrases for interesting?
Intriguing.
Intriguing, nice.
Appeal.
Appealing, yeah, could be.
Stimulating.
Stimulating, yeah, nice. Any others? What if you read a really good book and you can't put it down? Engrossing, that's a good one, yeah. Captivating, etc. So those are all examples of less common vocabulary, yeah? So it's not just about academic words, it's about different words instead of the normal ones that most people would use. In writing, the examiners are not looking for idioms. That's not really appropriate for writing. That would be more for speaking, so probably not idioms in your writing. And the second one is some awareness of style and collocation. Style and collocation. So style means kind of how formal or how informal is your vocabulary. So in English and in many languages, the vocabulary you use for writing is not always the same as what you use for speaking. Yeah, so for example, if you use an idiom in writing, it's a little bit informal. So you want to use vocabulary that's formal or academic, but not too formal. If all of your words are long 13, 14 letter words, and even the examiner doesn't know what it means, and they have to open a dictionary and says, what does that mean? Oh, new word for me. Then maybe that's a little bit too formal, yeah? So you should be aware of your style. It should be formal, but not too formal. Academic, but not too academic. And the second one is awareness of collocation. So collocation is when words often go together. And I'll talk about that a bit later with some examples. Basically, your job is to be a vocabulary ninja. Yeah. And unfortunately, there aren't any shortcuts. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of practice and hard work to remember those words or phrases. But there are some things that can help you. So there's this website which I think is really useful. It's called visuwords.com. And I'll see if it works on here. It's a really nice website which will show you visually, that's the visu, some synonyms, some related words, etc. So for this one, I put in interesting. I put in interesting, and it's a little bit complicated. You can see it gets really specific about what's the relationship. I don't worry about that too much. So here, interesting, I see, what are some related words? Exciting, newsworthy. So you see newsworthy, it's similar to. It's not exactly the same, it's similar to. So maybe I wouldn't use that one. Stimulating, I think somebody mentioned stimulating. Intriguing, absorbing, engrossing, fascinating. So the closer it is, the more similar it is. But if you notice, this one's a little bit far away. It's getting further away. Maybe a little bit less related, yeah? It also teaches you some opposites. Uninteresting. That's easy. Some other word forms, like here's the adverb, interestingly, etc. So it's a really nice way to kind of expand your vocabulary, but it's easier than reading a dictionary, I think. The only thing to be careful of is they're not exactly the same. So you can't just use this word or this word. There are little differences between them. Like here, for example, newsworthy, that's kind of, you know, interesting that it would be in the news. But I wouldn't say, oh, my girlfriend is such a newsworthy person. No, it's kind of different. So you have to be a little bit careful. You might need to still use a dictionary with this. But I think it's a nice website to, without much effort, kind of expand your vocabulary. So that one's visuwords.com. Yeah, visuwords.com. Another way to show off your vocabulary it's by using less common word forms. So in English, nouns usually have the most information. So the information in one noun is usually more than the information you get from an adverb or from an adjective. So nouns are really full of information. And in English, if you can change a verb into a noun, or a verb into a noun phrase, that's called nominalization. Yeah? It's when you make a noun phrase from a verb. And I'll show you some examples of this. And it's not easy, but it's easier than using less common synonyms, where often you can easily change a verb into a noun. Yeah? So in this sentence, they say, the planet's temperature is rising as a result of global warming. So this would be a verb phrase here. Whoops. Sorry. But an easy way to make it into a noun, you could just say the rise of. So instead of is rising, here they say the rise of. And it's not a show-off word, but it's taking a verb and making it into a noun phrase, which is a little bit more advanced in English vocabulary. A lot of nouns are really uncommon, and it's hard to know kind of what's the noun of this verb. But if you're able to, using noun phrases instead of verb phrases is a way of showing off your vocabulary. Yeah. So this is a simple example, but obviously a lot of nouns are quite hard to learn, quite hard to memorize. The third one is collocation. So collocation are when two or more words often go together. And I'll show you a few simple examples of what I mean. This one would be a verb. So what verb would often go with the word research? You do research. So if you use the wrong verb, if you say make research or have research, it just doesn't really go together, yeah? It's like a girlfriend and boyfriend who aren't really compatible, yeah? Yeah, so you're looking for a husband and wife, yeah? Here you could say do research, or you could say conduct research, carry out, etc. Yeah, so these are collocations that would naturally go together. Yeah. How about this one is an adverb? This one, yeah, wildly. Fluctuate wildly, yeah. Or you could say mildly. Yeah, you could say that's it. Maybe dramatically, etc. But if you say fluctuate slightly, it just doesn't really work, doesn't go together. It just sounds a bit strange, yeah? Fluctuate gradually, slightly. It just doesn't work. Yeah? How about this one, an adjective for issue? A lot of people would say controversial, yeah. That one's kind of overused. Controversial. What's another way to say controversial? A something issue. Instead of controversial. Debatable. A serious issue, yeah. Okay, so this is a tricky one. Now, it's a hard thing to do. If you look in the dictionary, and if you're looking for other collocations, it's kind of tricky. So these are two websites that can help you with collocations. The first one is called ozdic.com, and the second one is called Just the Word. And I'll show you some examples for issue. Let's use issue as an example. So the first one, if you go to ozdic.com, I put in issue as the noun. And quite easily, you can see we have a big issue, a burning issue, a central issue, a critical issue, a crucial issue, an important issue, a key issue, blah, blah, blah. This one for controversial, that's a nice word, contentious. a contentious issue, a thorny issue. So without much effort, you can kind of expand your collocations. Instead of just one word, you might be able to expand it to, say, 2 words, 3 words. And by doing that, you're showing your flexibility. And again, a 7, it's all about showing your flexibility. You have to be a little bit careful because, like visual words, it doesn't tell you the difference between them. Yeah, so for example, the difference between a vital issue and a major issue. It doesn't tell you here. So you might still have to use a dictionary to notice the difference between them. But it's pretty easy for a lot of examples. If you know this word, controversial, then this word contentious, obviously it's related. Yeah. So it's I think it's a pretty easy way to expand your collocations. The other one is called just the word. This one's a little bit more technical. Oh, looks like it's down. I must have crashed the server. Okay, I'll try that one a bit later. But it's a similar idea. This one is a little bit more technical, and it shows how common or how less common the collocation is. So I'll try that one a bit later. I guess the server must be down. But if you can, when you're learning a new word, if you can also think about the collocation, if you can expand your collocations, then that's another good way to show off your vocabulary to get a 7. Again, there's no shortcuts. It's a bit of hard work. But I think these websites can help you make it a bit easier. And speaking of some recommended websites, so I have a list here of some websites that I think are quite good for writing. The official Ielts site has lots of materials for teachers, but as a candidate, there's some good stuff in there. So you don't have to be a teacher to click on teachers. But there's lots of good practice essays, sample essays with comments from the examiners. It's not just for teachers, for candidates too. The official IELTS Asia.org has some good materials. British Council has some good materials as well. DC IELTS I think is quite good. Dominic Cole IELTS. He has videos, he has practice activities, etc. IELTS Liz I think is amazing. She has full videos. She covers every skill in IELTS. Lots of good video lessons. IELTSadvantage.com has some really good practice activities as well. IELTS Academic, IELTS Buddy is good for task 1. Whoops. IELTS Buddy is good for process writing and maps writing, which are kind of the other task ones you could get. They have some really good lessons about that. And IELTS Blog as well. So these ones I think are my personal favorites. If I had to choose only one, I'd probably choose British Council. If I had to choose only 2, I would probably choose IELTS Liz. I think she has some amazing material. IELTS Simon, I hope Simon's not watching on Facebook. IELTS Simon, there's one thing I don't like about Simon. It's when he writes sample essays, he always says band 9, right? And it's kind of like, according to me, I'm the most handsome man in the universe, according to me. But if you actually look at the criteria, not all of his essays, I think, would be a 9, particularly for organization. So if you remember earlier today, I said you want to use a range of discourse markers, a range of linking words. He often uses first of all, secondly, for example, in conclusion. And he rarely uses them within the sentence. They're almost always at the beginning. So particularly for organization, I don't think everything he writes is a 9, even though he says it's band 9. So I think he's sending the wrong message to candidates. Because candidates look at his essay and they think, this is how I should write. But if you look at the IELTS criteria, it's not always a 9. So I know Simon has some really good materials, but I think just be careful when he says it's a band 9. Be a little bit more critical. And maybe look at the criteria and think, well, is it a band 9? Why is it not a band 9? So Simon, some great things, but maybe be careful. Simon, if you're watching, I apologize. Don't hate me. Some books, if you like the old-fashioned way of using books. I really like this series called Improve Your Ielts. They have one for writing, they have one for listening and speaking, they have one for reading. Really good practice activities to improve your writing over time. So if you have a lot of time, if you have a lot of energy, I think this is a really good book. If you don't have much time, if your test is tomorrow or next week, don't use that one. Use this one. This one's called Action Plan, and right here on the cover they say last minute preparation. So it's everything you need to know. It's pretty short. It's about 130 pages, I think. It covers all of the 4 skills, but it's just what you need to know. There's not a lot of extra information, just what you need to know. So this is great if you don't have much time, or if you don't have much energy. I really like IELTS Test Builder for practice tests. I know it's not specifically for writing, but for their listening and reading tests, I think it's really good because the answer key explains the answer. So for example, if the answer is not given, it says why is it not given. Whereas the Cambridge books, it just says not given. And you say, but I wrote false. Why? Whereas this book will explain the answers. So not so much for writing. The writing samples are good, but I really like this series for the practice listening and reading tests. These ones are a little bit hard to find. Yeah, I don't know where you can buy them in Hanoi. But if you can find them, they're really good because they're official. They're official, straight from IELTS, yeah? There are 2 volumes. There's volume 1 and volume 2. They have a full practice test, and for writing they have about, I think, 3 or 4 for task 1 and task 2. They have sample essays, and they have scores from the examiner and comments from the examiner. So it's a good way to see what do the examiners give these sample essays. Yeah. If you can find volume 2, there's a DVD. If you still have a DVD player, most laptops don't have anymore, there are 3 full speaking tests. So you can see what happens in the speaking test, what does it feel like when you do your test in the room, what score did the examiner give, etc. So if you can find them, really good. This is another good book. It's called High Scoring IELTS Writing Model Answers. Easy to find in Vietnam. It's published in Vietnam. And this one's good because they're honest. They say, based on past papers. A lot of publishers will say things like actual tests or recent tests. But IELTS never releases their tests to the public. So if any book says actual tests, they're kind of telling a lie because IELTS doesn't release them. So at least this book is honest. They say based on past papers. Yeah. So they're similar to IELTS exams from the past. And when they say high scoring, they're actually high scoring. So when I read these essays, all of them are at least an 8. They're all really good quality essays. And it's really good for vocabulary because they have translations into Vietnamese. Yeah. So sometimes when you're learning vocabulary, if it's all in English, it's so much hard work. And if it's a translation, sometimes it's so easy. So this book has translations for vocabulary, which is quite helpful. Okay, so that's the end of the session. Before we move on to the questions part, where you can win some amazing prizes, if you can still remember, I know it's been a long evening, what are 3 things you remember from today's session, yeah? To refresh your memory, yeah? So with a partner or comment on the Facebook, what 3 things do you remember from today's session? Yeah? Okay, so hopefully a few of these things stuck. Yeah, I know there's been a lot of information, but at least if 3 of them stuck, then I'm happy. Yeah. So let's review what were the 5 secrets to success. What was the first one? Task achievement, yeah. Second one was referencing substitution. Oh, sorry, range of cohesive devices, yeah. Referencing substitution, yeah. I think we missed one though, didn't we? Before that, overview, good, clear overview, really important in task 1, yeah. Really important sentence. We talked about referencing substitution. After that, clear position, yeah. And the last one was, yeah, less common vocabulary, collocations, etc. Good. Okay, now, for me, it's the hard part. For you, I think it's the easy part. Any questions? And remember, if you ask any question, and for our friends on Facebook as well, there'll be some prizes for you if you ask some good questions. So any questions about writing? Yeah.
Hopefully it brings the quotes by the famous or well-known person into the IELTS writing class.
Can you bring quotes from a famous person into writing? You can. It's a little bit tricky because you'd have to memorize them. And it can be difficult to make sure the quote relates to the topic. Yeah. So a lot of people, they might just memorize a quote from Einstein and try and use it for any topic. So it's a little bit risky, I think. And it's easy to make a mistake. So if you don't remember it exactly, or if you make a mistake with one of the words. So for IELTS, I probably would avoid it because they're not expecting you to bring anything from outside, right? So you don't have to bring in any facts. You're not expected to have any research or even quotes. So you're not expected to, and it's a little bit risky because it's easy to make a mistake. So maybe I would try and avoid quotes. Yeah. Oh, Ling, how do I do the prizes? You can choose. Okay, thanks very much. You can choose a prize. We have IELTS Essential Guide. We have USBs, notebooks, keywords for IELTS. Good choice. I would choose the same.
Thank you.
Enjoy. Happy reading. Oh, now everybody's hands go up. It's that easy. It is that easy. Yeah. I strongly believe that, or I believe that. It kind of depends on, I guess, how strong your opinions are. So for IELTS, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you strongly believe, if you slightly believe, if you strongly disagree. I think some people think that stronger is better. But in IELTS, that's not true. As long as it's clear, that's what's important. So whether you slightly believe or strongly believe, that's not really too important, as long as it's clear to the reader. Yeah. So you don't have to always be strong. I think some people think strong means a strong score, but it's not always like that. Yeah. So as long as it's clear, if you slightly agree or strongly agree, the strength doesn't matter too much. It's just, can you be clear in your essay? Yeah. Okay, questions for the online audience. Mr. Wu says, how to effectively solve the chart problems to get maximum score? Solve the chart problems. I guess what that means is, what do I need to cover in a chart to get a high score? If you look at the criteria, it says covers all key features. So what you want to do is you want to look at the graph and think what's important. And for example, if it's a pie chart, if you miss out a category, you're missing an important detail, which would really hurt your score. So to get a maximum score, you'd want to cover all the important features, and you'd want to support it with some data or some numbers or figures. So if you say it increased, you should say, how much did it increase, for example? Question from Cho. Could you please tell me how I can manage to have enough time to finish 2 tasks? You can pray to the gods. That's hard. And like I said at the beginning, for me, that's the hardest part, is doing all of these things in 60 minutes. Planning helps. Planning, so thinking of your ideas or looking at the chart before you write, it helps, because that way you don't have to stop and think. Yeah? If you can think of your ideas, maybe take a few notes. For me, that helps speed it up. And it also helps me to stay focused. So I'm not trying to cover too much. I'm not trying to include too many ideas. It helps me stay focused, kind of eyes on the prize. So I think thinking of your ideas before you write, even if it's only 2 or 3 minutes, I think for me that helps me to plan my time. Whether you start with task 1 or start with task 2, that's kind of your personal decision. Nobody will tell you in Ielts. They won't say, stop task 1, please, stop task 1. It's up to you to manage your time for both tasks. I do notice the people who start with task 2 often run out of time for task 1, because I think they spend too much time on their ideas in the essay, and then they have to rush to do their task 1. So if you do start with task 2, be very careful that you really are strict with your time. Yeah? If it's 40 minutes, you gotta finish and move on to task 1. Practice as well. So when you're practicing at home, be really strict with the time. Yeah? Close your door, lock your door, turn off your Facebook, except when you're watching today's live feed. And just be really strict when you're practicing so that you get used to the feeling. I think that could help a little bit. Cheng asked, how can we use respectively with 3 things? Good question. I forgot to give an example for that. Try and write it here. So here's an example of respectively for 3 things. So I'm not sure if you can read my writing, probably not. The price of gold, silver, and copper. Yeah, so let's say gold, number 1, copper 2, silver 2, copper 3, were $100, that's gold, $50, silver, and $25, respectively. I normally use a comma before it. Some people don't use a comma. I'm a traditionalist, I guess. So I would probably put comma respectively. Again, yeah, I wouldn't use it for more than 4 things. So if it said gold, silver, copper, and something, it gets a little bit complicated. So I would just use it for 3 things. But good questions. Thanks very much, Vu, Cho, and Cheng. Great questions. Sorry, I forgot the prize. You can choose any prize you'd like. Oh, this is a popular one. Ling, I think we need to get more of these. Go ahead, yeah.
Yes, could you please share the experiences around how to increase the capacity of academic works? Because sometimes I use the words, but I don't know if it is used in spoken English or in written English.
Yeah.
So there is some difference.
Sure. Actually, funny you should mention, because a good dictionary, I'm not promoting Collins specifically, but they actually are quite good because they'll tell you if it's academic. So right here, core, it says academic word. And there are other dictionaries. Macmillan is quite good for that. Oxford has, I think they call them keywords, or the Oxford 3000 or something. So good dictionaries will tell you if it's academic, if it's formal, if it's informal, whereas other maybe lower quality dictionaries wouldn't tell you that information. And that's why you have to be careful. Although I recommended those websites, they don't tell you that information. So you'd have to use them in combination with a good dictionary. And the hard part is to remember. It's easy to learn vocabulary, but it's hard to remember it. So having a good notebook can help you. So you might want to have categories. So you might have like academic vocabulary in one part, speaking vocabulary in another part, so that when you're revising your vocabulary, you can kind of categorize it. But to be honest, it's really hard to remember vocabulary and to remember, is it formal, is it informal? That's actually quite a lot of effort. But my advice would be get a good dictionary that will tell you if it's kind of formal or informal, academic or not academic, etc.
Well, to me, many people recommend using a great newspaper, official newspaper or website to repeat or use the words. What do you think about that?
It's great. I mean, the thing about vocabulary is you don't just learn a word once. Like for it to stick in your memory, you have to see it again and again and again. And there's lots of research. From what I remember, it's something like, I think it's 9 or 12 times. So if you see a new word, it takes about 9 to 12 times for it to really stick. Unless it's like a really important word, like for your job, you might need to see it once. But if it's just a random word like deplete, okay, if I just learn deplete, I'll probably forget it tomorrow morning. Say D something, what was it? But if tomorrow I read a newspaper and I see deplete, I say, oh, it refreshes my memory. So the more you can encounter vocabulary, the more it's likely you'll remember it. So read as much as possible. Newspapers are great, but remember, newspapers are kind of one style. So it's good for vocabulary, but it might not be very good for helping you in your essay. Yeah, because it's a very different way of writing. But yeah, the more you read, the more you can watch or listen, the more vocabulary is likely to stick in your memory, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sure, yeah. What prize would you like?
That one.
Okay. I think that's the last one.
Thank you very much.
Actually, yeah, that's how you first.
Thank you. I have two questions.
Sure.
Okay, for IELTS Class 2,
Yeah.
the exercise user question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of something? So in this case, should I just give the analysis of the advantages and disadvantages, or should I also include my personal viewpoints?
Good question. Yeah. So I'll just go back to the slide. So it was advantages and disadvantages. Was that it?
No, so the question is,
Yeah.
what are the advantages?
What are the advantages? Okay. Yeah.
So it's something like somewhere in between.
Okay, good. So if the question is what are the advantages, disadvantages, they're not asking for your opinion. They're just asking you to analyze it. So for that one, it depends if you want to just talk about one. But again, for me, I'd probably be balanced and I'd say, okay, here are some of the advantages and here are some of the disadvantages. But if they're not asking you for your position, like this question where it says, do the advantages outweigh, then you don't actually have to give your opinion. Yeah?
Because I read in some books, it suggests that whether you are asked to give your personal opinion or not, you
Yeah.
are, or you are expected to give your personal opinion.
Well, not exactly, because I always like to imagine if you go to court, yeah? So let's say you go to a court of law and you have to defend yourself. You could defend yourself and say, well, they just asked me what are the advantages and they didn't ask me what do I think about it. So I think you would be able to defend yourself in court. But for this question, if it says, do the advantages outweigh, you would, if you went to court and you say, well, I didn't answer the question, but I don't have to, they'd say, yeah, yes, you do. So I think for what are the advantages, disadvantages, you don't have to give your opinion. But for this question, you do have to give your opinion. So just be very careful when you read the question. Some people skim it, and they might say, yeah, advantages, disadvantages, I know. And they might not notice the do, for example. So just be really slow when you're reading the question so that you don't make a mistake. Yeah.
And thank you very much.
You're
And
welcome.
my second question is for the IELTS Class 1 on process.
Yeah.
Sometimes if we have a very complicated process, especially for manufacturing process, things like that, and we hardly have a comprehensive understanding of what the process is about.
Yeah.
So what am I suggesting to do?
Good question. Process. So what are you expected to do? Just get my pen. Where did I put my pen? There it is. Okay, so for a process, I think it's the easiest task one. And I'll explain why. A process, they're expecting you to describe what you see. Whereas a graph, they're expecting you to summarize the information. And in order to summarize the information, you need to understand it. Because you need to think about what's important, what's less important, what's a key feature, what's a supporting feature. There's a lot of thinking for a graph. A process, all you're doing is you're summarizing the picture. You're summarizing what you see. So you don't have to understand it. Like if it's a complicated process about how soybeans are harvested, and I see the picture and I say, I have no idea what this means. It doesn't matter that much because I'm just describing what I see. Yeah? So it's a very visual task. And the other thing about process is, the other thing about process is it's okay to use the vocabulary on the picture. Right? You're not allowed to use the vocabulary in the box at the top. So the one that says the graph gives information about, or sorry, this is a process about how soybeans are made. But if there's any vocabulary on the graph, it's okay to use that. It's not considered copying. So even if you don't understand what it means, it's okay to use the vocabulary on here. It's great if you can use synonyms, but you're not expected to. So for process, always remember, they're not testing, do you understand what happened? They're testing, can you summarize this complicated picture in a simple way? So even if you don't understand how it works, it's not an engineering test. It's just a language test. So don't worry too much about if you don't understand it. Just try your best to summarize what you see. And remember, it's okay to use vocabulary from the picture when you do that. Yeah.
So for the overview for process, we just summarize these stages.
Overview for a process, I would normally, the simplest way is how many stages and what's the end result. So for example, if it's this complicated picture, I might say overall after 4 stages, bottles are produced. And that'd be a very simple example, but that's basically how you'd write an overview for processes. How many stages, like how many separate stages, and then at the end, what happened. You're welcome. Which one would you like? We have USB, notebooks, movie tickets from CGV, Ielts guy. This one? Oh, happy reading. That's going to put you to sleep very quickly. Okay. Oh, a lot of questions. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm always struggling with the consolation in task 2. So
Okay.
Can you give some tips to write fast?
Yep. Conclusion in task 2. Okay. So it depends on the question, but let's assume you get a position question, right? So let's say, assume you get agree, disagree, or something like that, yeah? The first thing, most important is what's your overall position? Yeah, so if the question is, to what extent do you agree or disagree, the first thing you need to do is say the answer to the question. Yeah. Overall, I strongly agree that the government should pay for education. So that would be your first sentence. Must be clear. No coins have 2 sides. Clear opinion, yeah? After that, if you want to make it a bit longer, there are a few things you could do. So you could summarize your reasons. So you might say, overall, I strongly agree the government should fund education because, and your first reason was this, your second reason was that. You could kind of summarize your reasons. You could also end it with something like a prediction. So you might say, for example, if the government funds education, children will be more likely to be successful in their future careers or something like that. Or so you could give a prediction. You might give some advice. Yeah, so you could say, I strongly encourage the government to fund education because children deserve a bright future. Something like that. What else could you do? Yeah, those are all I can think of. But really the most important thing is you need to have an overall position if it's a position question. If it's not a position, if it's an analysis, then I would probably summarize what I talked about in my essay. And again, your last sentence is optional, but you maybe do something general like a prediction for the future or some advice or something like that. Yeah.
According to some of my English teachers, they say that we are not allowed to add a new idea into the conclusion.
Correct.
So prediction and advice, do it seem like a new idea in conclusion or not?
It's not. I mean, you have to be careful that you don't want to give a new reason in your conclusion. But I think if it's something general, like a general prediction or a general piece of advice, I don't think you're including a new idea because I think it's still related to your overall essay. So as long as it's pretty general, I wouldn't worry about that. But if it's a very specific new idea, then you'd have to be careful. But I think for this part, as long as it's general, you don't have to worry about that too much. Yeah. If you are worried about it, then just don't write that one. But for me, I wouldn't consider that a new idea. Yeah. You're welcome. What would you like? You have choices of notebook, USB, movie ticket, or IELTS Essential Guide.
Can I get another Coherence book?
Can we get another Collins book, Ling? Sorry, I think we've run out. Yeah.
I will take the IELTS about more than 1 month, so
Ooh.
do you think that I will read it?
Okay, I think so. If you can read, how long is it? It's 490 pages. So that would be how many pages a day? My math's not very good, but it's possible if you're dedicated.
Okay, I will try.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy. Good luck. Yeah.
Should we use the IELTS itself or the quiz console, if possible?
The IELTS itself?
Yeah, if possible, in the writing test.
What do you mean by the IELTS itself?
Should we include an example about the IELTS?
Oh, an example about the IELTS. I guess it depends on the topic. So if the topic were about language tests or tests, maybe, if it's relevant. But yeah, it's okay to use the IELTS as an example as long as it's relevant. But I think it's not too often in IELTS you'd get a topic about English tests. But maybe if it's a topic about language or if it's a topic about education, you might be able to. You don't have to say IELTS is great. It's not like the examiner will say, good example, have a 9. But as long as it's relevant, then yeah, it's okay. Yeah. Just think about whether it's relevant to use that example or not. Okay. You have a choice of notebooks, USB, or movie tickets.
Yeah, I think I will have to settle with the
Okay. I would choose this is a really nice one, actually. Okay. Oh, we have 3 questions from Facebook. Let me think. We have 4 prizes. The first question from Tui Lei is, should we use the first person pronoun, I, me, or we, when we want to express our personal opinion? In IELTS, it's okay. I know for a lot of formal writing, like your assignments at school or dissertations, you avoid it. But for IELTS, it's okay to use personal pronouns. I think, in my opinion, I believe, etc. And it's also okay to use personal experience for your examples. So if you give an example, it doesn't have to be a statistic or a fact. You could say, for example, in my hometown, people blah, blah, blah. Or in my country, people blah, blah, blah. So for examples, it's okay to use an example from your personal experience. It's okay in IELTS. So it's a formal writing, but it's not too formal. It's okay to use I, me, my opinion, etc. Chuang had a question. What if task 1 is mixed with 2 charts? How do we know which is the main chart and how much should it account in our writing? Okay, so if you get more than 1 graph in task 1, you have to cover both of them. Right? If you miss the second one, I think you'll get a 4 for task achievement. You missed a key feature. So you have to talk about both of them. Which one is the main one? Which is the secondary one? It kind of depends. but it's not that important. You don't need to think about that. As long as you cover the key features for both. If it's a bigger graph, you'll probably write more for that one. But to be honest, you don't need to worry about that much, Chuang, because as long as you cover the key features in both, you'll be all right. So don't worry if your two paragraphs are not the same length. If one is bigger than the other, it's not a problem for that situation. The last question is from Tup Ang. Task 1, for example, requires at least 150 words. Should I write about 200 to 250? Or stick to the 10% rule, which means I should be plus or minus 15 words to the essay's length? Okay, you don't need to write 200 to 250. In fact, it's really hard to. For most task 1s, it's really hard to write that many words. There's just not that much information. So no, you don't need to write more. You won't get any bonus points for writing extra. So no, you shouldn't. I wouldn't try and write 200 to 250 words. The 10% rule, it's not really a rule because that's not what Ielts does. They just care about the minimum. So you need to write 150 words. That's it. If you write more, okay, no problem. If you write less, problem, because you'll start to get points deducted depending on how short it is. So there is no 10% rule. It's 150 words minimum. So always try and write at least 150. Yeah. Good questions from the Facebook crew. I think we have one more prize. Okay, I'm going to be as fair as possible. I'm going to close my eyes. I'll say 1, 2, 3, hands up, and the first hand I see, I will ask. Okay. Okay, hands down. I'm not looking. Hands down. Okay. 1, 2, 3, hands up. I saw this in the purple. Yeah.
I have a question. If I do look, if I know how to take advantage of use file secrets, can get the writing time. But I make the policies in critical thinking. What happened and what can it affect to your criteria?
Good. So, good question. So the question was about, let's say you follow the 5 secrets, which is great. I hope you do. But let's say you have some problem with your critical thinking and your ideas. How will it affect your score? To be honest, it doesn't really affect your score because it's not a test of your critical thinking. It's not a test of your ideas. It's not a test of how smart you are. It's not a test of your creativity. It's just a language test, right? So the EL in IELTS stands for English language. It's not the International How Smart Are You test, which would be the how smelts, I guess. So you don't need to worry too much about being critical. You don't need to worry too much about being a balanced thinker and considering the other side and all of those things. Because really what IELTS is testing is, can you clearly communicate ideas? And that's it. It's not about how smart you sound or can you include facts and statistics. It's just about can you clearly communicate ideas. So don't worry about how critical you are. Don't worry about how balanced you are. As long as you can answer the question clearly, that's what IELTS is looking for.
Even when I get so many common policies like authority or strongman or postword.
Yeah, you don't need to worry about all those. It's good that you know about those straw man and red herring and slippery slopes. But to be honest, it's not like a university assignment where they might be looking for, can you be critical? It's just a test of your language. So if you're able to use those concepts, that's great. But IELTS doesn't expect them. They just expect answer the question clearly and explain your ideas. That's it. Yeah. Okay, good. So you have a choice of USB movie tickets or notebooks.
What about the
I think these are actually from the classroom, so I don't want to get in trouble from the British Council.
I like the movie.
Ah, yes, good choice. Enjoy.
Okay.
If you're looking for somebody to go with you, I'm sorry, I'm married, so I'm not allowed to.
300,000.
300,000, so you can bring 2 friends, yes. Or on Happy Wednesday, you can bring 4 friends, maybe. So make lots of friends here today. And she'll treat you to a movie. Yes. Okay, well, thanks very much. If you have any other questions, I'll stick around here. And Facebook fans, if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments, and I'll try and answer them in the future. Thanks very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, and good luck in your IELTS. I hope you get the score you need. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
It's about the discussion essays. It's about if what are the discuss both views.
Yeah, and give your opinion. Yeah.
So is there a rule that we should give the opinion that we support first, or we can write an email?
There isn't a rule. Normally, what most people would do is they just follow the same order as the box. So for